Hey, what's happening, everybody? Sorry about the delay. I had some issues with the old camera here, so I had to reboot my ancient but trusty Macintosh laptop computer so that it could wake up and recognize that I have the camera. As you can see, we are now broadcasting to you live through the StreamYard application. I've decided to go full on StreamYard from here on out. So there won't be any more Zoom interface, and hopefully a lot of the quirks and the kinks that I was experiencing with Zoom will be resolved here. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being patient. I got a really great show today waiting for y'all. Masaki Miyagawa is going to be showing up here in about 45 minutes, and we're going to cover a lot of territory today. The first 45 minutes now are really going to be devoted as much as I can to the eclipse that we're going to be experiencing on the 21st. I think it's a really, really significant eclipse. And I do think eclipses have some inherent intensity, some inherent power. They're not always predictable. This is the one thing that I have come to learn and understand and know about eclipses is that they're not always predictable. And there are times when they can be very predictable and very what's the word I'm looking for? Palpable, visible, interpretable. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a client who was a Leo rising, Pluto with Leo on the ascendant at 28 degrees. So we go back and we look at that 2017 solar eclipse that went right across North America. And you would think that that eclipse hitting her ascendant at that degree with Pluto there would have been just a real powerful, intense, deep, transformational kind of moment in time. And it really wasn't for this person. So I was very curious in a lot of ways. Like why didn't that eclipse or even the moment before the eclipse or a few weeks after the eclipse, why didn't it impact her in such a intense way? And then I found out that really she'd been living a very Plutonian life most of her life, and that she had gone through a very intense kind of experience around losing her career, losing her family, winding up being addicted to drugs. This is a person who had a high level career as a producer in television, and really went into the whole kind of rehab, what we would call a halfway house situation. And so when that eclipse hit, it was like, I don't know whether she got a break or whether it was because she'd been living with the intensity of Pluto all of her life. It didn't seem to affect her. Now, that said, we can actually look at that 2017 eclipse with Donald J. Trump. And of course, I've talked about that moment before where he's staring right into the eclipse. And it's a very, very symbolic moment in a lot of ways. And his Mars is right on the ascendant in Leo, right? I think it's Mars 28 Leo. I don't think it was a good portent for him, actually. I really don't, because number one, it feels like on some level, like Mars represents power, represents will, it represents force, represents overcoming obstacles, right? That's the nature of Mars. So in a lot of ways, when that solar eclipse was happening, in a lot of ways, it was eclipsing his Mars, and it was eclipsing his quote unquote level of power, theoretically. And in some ways, that's actually true, right? In some ways, that's actually true, because what happened really on the heels, because that happens quite early in the presidency. Right? That's going to be 8 months into his presidency. Now they're already starting to go through some of the Russia Gate stuff and yada yada yada, right? But from that point forward, he has a very, very difficult time asserting his will as the quote unquote president of the United States. I think it's noteworthy. I think that eclipse is very noteworthy, especially as it relates to Trump. Now, we just saw another eclipse last week, partial eclipse, but it was on his moon. And of course, we know that he was born on a lunar eclipse. So when it was taking place on his moon is in Sagittarius, which means he's going to have some interesting connections with Sagittarian people or Sagittarian energies in his life. And it's important to note that 2 out of the 3 wives that he has had in his life were from other countries. Sagittarius, right? Other countries. And the second wife, Marla Maples, happens to be, if I'm not mistaken, Jewish. So even though she's not from another country, she's clearly from another religion, which also falls into the Sagittarian connection, right? And if you look at his kids, all of his kids have married into Jewish families, right? So the home theoretically being the moon in his 4th house, that his children would either be marrying people from other countries, which that hasn't really happened yet, but clearly people from theoretical other religions. Now, there are some people who believe that Donald Trump is actually Jewish himself. And there are, if you go into Miles Mathis' world, there's some interesting information that might actually prove that to be true. But let's just say on the surface it's not. We can clearly see that his children, his offspring, have married into, with families from quote unquote other faiths. And Sagittarius is a sign that rules faiths, especially the orthodoxies, right? The Orthodox faiths. So this eclipse energy is really interesting. Now, who came into Trump's circle pretty much right at the eclipse, or just there, is John Bolton. And John Bolton is, guess what? A Sagittarius. So Trump has that eclipse energy on his moon. Here comes John Bolton, Sagittarius, with a book about Trump's involvement with what? Other countries, right? He talks about Ukraine. He talks about China. So we can see that in this instance, that eclipse happening on his eclipse moon, I think, was impactful and will continue to be impactful. So, and that eclipse energy for him is moving out 6.5 weeks to actually 6 months, depending upon the bandwidth of the eclipse. I've seen other people when these eclipse energies come in, and Trump is just one of them. I just gave you an example where the eclipse does impact them. I've seen it. I've seen how they have changed vis-a-vis the energy of an eclipse. So, it's not always, eclipses aren't always predictable. Sometimes they are, and they're very clear in their manifestation and their energy. Sometimes they're not. We had Les Visible on last week, and he's, Les is born on 8/22, which makes his sun 29 degrees Leo. So that last eclipse in 2017 happened on his sun. We asked him, did anything happen around that time? He said no. But then again, he's lived a very intense, almost eclipse life. I just had a client recently ask me, well, she didn't really ask me. I looked at her chart. I said, well, you were born on an eclipse. And so we talked about that. She was born on this eclipse right now, if I'm not mistaken. She's a Cancer, right? So, or a little bit later, just a little bit later, like later degree Cancer, about 20 degrees Cancer, not quite right now. I was born on an eclipse. Actually, my mother went into labor on an eclipse, and then I was born, about a day after that, right? A little less than a day after that. So technically speaking, I was born on an eclipse. And it's interesting because I've found more people than you would think are born on eclipses, at least in, my work. So anyway, what does it mean to be born on an eclipse? So I have some kind of general interpretations. One is that the life tends to be fated. Like the individual have a sense that their life has either some kind of purpose or meaning, or that they were sort of meant for something, or that they were, or they have been sort of put along a certain path for a certain reason, and sometimes even, I wouldn't say against their will per se, but as kind of a byproduct of this thing that moves them forward into the universe or through time. So there is that. Along with that, there can be events that can be fated and can be very, very, pivotal, and that will shape their destiny and their trajectory as well. The other thing with an eclipse, on the solar side, now remember, this is the moon in front of the sun, which means that the sun or the individual is eclipsed. Like, you can't see them, right? You can't see them, and sometimes they can't even see their own impact in the world because it is eclipsed, right? So it's a very interesting kind of dynamic to be born on an eclipse. And I've talked to eclipse people, and they will basically confirm what I'm saying. On the moon side, it has to do with the emotions, right? And people, remember that's a full moon. So if you're born on a full moon, theoretically, it's like your time to shine, right? Like, it's the apex of the moon. So that doesn't really, that can be challenging. Sometimes that can be eclipsed. You don't always get what you want emotionally, or people don't always understand how you truly feel, or they don't always see how you truly feel. Sometimes when we get into eclipses, we get into this shadow, right? Because there is no shadow with an eclipsed moon. There's a dark moon, right? You don't see a darn thing, right? There's no moonlight. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, especially if you're born in and around an eclipse. Some of these things happen. So you have a quality of like fatedness. And you also have a quality of also not being seen, and not also being to see yourself, or not always being able to see your impact, whether it's from the position of the solar expression or from the lunar expression. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Okay. Let me get back. Let me get into sort of the invocation here. We're going to get things rolling. Dear blessed and holy Father, Mother God of the great central sun, with the universal light, which is the light of Yeshua Sananda Emmanuel, we ask that we have only the highest and best information, only the highest and best truth, only the highest and best wisdom to come through this channel, literally and figuratively, at this time. We also ask for courage, empathy, love, faith, guidance, clarity, direction, patience, wisdom. All of these things we ask in the highest and best spirit of the Logos moving through us. And if there's any karmic residue that we share, let it be clarified, purified, cleansed, and burned away, so that we may re-enter our experience from the place of being sovereign. So be it. All right. Hello, Chatlandia. Where are you? Robert Phoenix, you are a Sagittarius. What date? I'm on December 6th. I want to know how far off I am on the eclipse. I am not a Sagittarius, by the way. I do have Jupiter in Sagittarius in my chart. Thank you for asking. I have Jupiter in Sagittarius, 25 degrees, trying Leo in the 9th house. My first house is mostly Sagittarius, and I have part of fortune in Sagittarius. So you got the Sagittarian thing down. I was born 29 degrees Virgo. So my eclipse, the eclipse that took place for me, was on the autumnal equinox. Okay? So I hope that answers some questions for you. All right, so let's get right into this. We got Masaki coming up at the top of the hour. I want to look at this eclipse. First of all, it is an annular eclipse. And so if you looked at the graphic, you will see what an annular eclipse looks like. If you are not familiar with an annular eclipse, I'm going to show it to you right now. Here we go. So this is what an annular eclipse looks like right here. Just make this bigger. Should have just had a bigger image. Anyway, it is like the ring of fire, right? So it is not a total solar eclipse, right? It is not penumbral. It is annular, meaning that the moon is just slightly smaller than the sun, which is kind of a very interesting phenomenon when you really think about it. But we get this ring of fire effect, which is quite dramatic, right? It's a very, very dramatic effect. And of course, the this current eclipse is actually taking place. Guess where? In the ring of fire. Like it will move across the path of the ring of fire, which happens to be in the South Pacific. So one of the things that I would wrap my head around with this eclipse is seismic activity. And we have seen prior eclipses. There was one total solar eclipse, which was very, very powerful and very prominent in the 1990s over Iran. And just days after that eclipse, there was a massive earthquake in Iran. So this is kind of another important thing to contemplate, is the potential seismic impact. Now, the last eclipse that we saw that happened in December, and again, it's along the same path. I'm going to show you guys. It's almost the same path as that December eclipse. And there was a volcano that blew in the Philippines, right? And it was along that eclipse path. So we saw a volcano blow, and there was also some tsunami activity that also took place. So again, there was definitely some seismic action happening. Let's look at the eclipse path, the actual physical eclipse path. You guys will get a chance to see where it's actually headed. Okay. Here we go. So this will give you a pretty good indication of this eclipse path. I'll show you here. Okay, so you guys, whoops. My bad. Here we go. So the eclipse path really starts here, off the coast of, which is I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is Liberia. This is Liberia, and this is where it starts. There's some very interesting kinds of, how shall we say this, geographic connotations here as this eclipse path moves through Africa. And then we see it go all the way through part of the, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is Saudi Arabia. So the lower part of Saudi Arabia here. And then it's going to wind up going through India and then, of course, China. This is really important. Like this is kind of a big deal right here. And the reason why is because tensions are seriously heating up in this part of the world. And Masaki and I are going to talk about that. They've had some pretty intense border skirmishes right now with India and China, right? And it's coming essentially through Pakistan. Now, if I'm not mistaken as well, right, this is sort of the lower part of China. This is going to be right around where Wuhan is. This is like Wuhan, Hubei province, Shanghai. This goes back to the scene of the crime, which takes us back to that eclipse in December, which is when it all kicks off. So these two eclipses are linked together. So this is the companion eclipse of the eclipse from December, right? And we knew that there was going to be some intensity and some heaviness that was going to go down in that part of the world. Heather Neal and I talked about that. And I really thought something was going to go off in a major way with Hong Kong, because that eclipse was hitting right on Hong Kong's midheaven. And in some ways it did, but it happened indirectly. It actually came from another part of China, because once the supposed coronavirus happened, right, they just put a huge quarantine on Hong Kong, and a lot of the protests against mainland China were shut down. It was like really, and I'm not sure where they are, and I think they may be picking back up again. But it did have an impact. And if you go back now and look at some of the opinions or some of the justifications that the Chinese are using for the coronavirus, they're looking at that eclipse. Okay, they're now like saying, well, the coronavirus was brought on by the eclipse. And by the way, again, no slight to anybody who happens to be Chinese or Asian, but specifically Chinese. That it is a culture that is deeply, deeply steeped in superstition, right? A lot of family legacy superstition, ancestors. And when I was back in the doing the tarot thing, I would get Asian clients. The Chinese women they really liked having their cards read. They were really into it. And I remember one time the company, Donna Karen, used to hire me out, and I would go into Macy's and I would do tarot card readings in Macy's, because they would have a new Donna Karen product that was like shaped like a crystal or whatever, right? So I would meet some of these women who were very different than my normal clientele. But I remember back in the day, I'm connecting the dots. I seem to have a lot of Asian women and Chinese women that were really into tarot. And anyway, this one woman comes up to me, and she had got involved in with a gypsy. And the gypsies know that they can really prey upon the superstition, the family, the ancestral kinds of ties and connections that the Chinese women or Chinese people in general have. So the gypsies would they told this one woman, "You've got to give me." I'm sorry. You've got to give me your jewels. You've got to give me your jewelry. I have to be able to cleanse it because it's been cursed by your ancestors. I swear to God. And this woman gave over probably close to $50,000 worth of jewelry to these gypsies. She never saw it again. But that just gives you kind of an insight, right? An insight. So when they look at things like eclipses, it's not something that they're just pulling out of the hat and saying, well, really, and even though they've become these, corporate Maoists, that thread of the supernatural and the superstitious still runs through that culture. So when they say the eclipse was to blame on, it was the reason behind COVID-19 or Corona, I don't think they're bullshitting. I think they're actually in some level of belief with that. So I got a lot of charts to cover. By the way, welcome everybody. Welcome. It's good to see you here. It's good to be part of our time on this planet today. So I've got a bunch of comparison charts. Where do I want to start? Let's start here. This is going to be the eclipse chart that's connected to the last eclipse. Here we go. I just love this StreamYard, man. It's so cool. So we have the annular eclipse, which is going to be on the outside. And I used Hong Kong here. Now you can see that the eclipse energies, this is Hong Kong's midheaven right here. Now remember, I'm using Hong Kong because of its specific chart when it was birthed into existence, right? It was birthed into existence. But I was looking at it, well, but I was looking at it from this position. So it was going right over. All right, so here's two things. Okay, so it was going over Hong Kong's midheaven. It is actual midheaven. Like, so when you look at the chart of Hong Kong, you will see the planets. And Hong Kong was, I believe, started July 7th, right? If I'm not mistaken. So a lot of its planets are kind of at the bottom of the chart. If you look at the Hong Kong chart, Cancerian. Anyway, so the midheaven happens to be Capricorn in the Hong Kong chart. And here we're at the time when the eclipse was at its peak. It was also crossing Hong Kong's midheaven. So it was really kind of an interesting phenomenon. You don't see that very often. But again, keep in mind that it was also sweeping through China and primarily southern China, not far from Wuhan. Now, here we go. This is a bit of a different story because we have the annular eclipsed energies, which are on the inside, right, in the sign of Cancer, really operating mostly here, kind of out of Hong Kong's fourth house. You see that? Because that's where Hong Kong's actual sun is. If we were to punch this up and we're getting the Hong Kong chart. So we could see the opposition, right? You're just getting a glimpse as to like this binary effect in dealing with these oppositional energies. And what we saw during that time, keep this in mind, what we saw during that time was not just what happened in Hong Kong, in China, around the coronavirus, or at least the idea that it was somehow triggering or involved in this coronal events. But we saw really the intense activation of these Capricornian forces, right? These Capricornian forces. And it was a time where they were pushing all in Hong Kong, in Wuhan. They were pushing all in, shutting everything down, locking people up, and really taking dissenters off the street. And it's not long after that that here in the U.S. we wind up dealing with the same thing. Now, on the U.S. side of things, we have that Pluto-Saturn conjunction, which is happening down in the U.S. the second house of the U.S. chart, and really beginning to torque and transform that kind of Plutonian birth that took place in theoretical 1776. And we saw kind of a mirror event, ultimately, what happens with China shutting down the country. We see, kind of this all-in moment with the forces of Sauron, which is really Saturn, and Saturn being, of course, a player in this cosmic drama. But now it's like we're flipping here. Now we're flipping. And I'm very interested in how these oppositional energies are going to play out. How they're going to play out in China and how they're going to play out here in the United States and across the world, really, because now we're linked up in this sort of, it's a global network, but it's more than that. It's almost like a galactic network. And these influencers are very pervasive now. So I could talk about the United States specifically, but we can't talk about the United States now without, in some ways, talking about the rest of the planet, because that's kind of where we are at this point. So, how are these Cancerian energies going to manifest? Is it going to manifest in more control? Are they going to use this Mercury retrograde energy to bring people back into their homes? Are we going to be looking at another wave of the so-called virus? I think there's a distinct possibility that could be true. I mean, if we're looking at what happened in December, right? If we're looking at what happened in December, we see the events that unfolded in December, and we're on the other side of this thing, and it's connected to that event. would it not be part of the pattern that we would see a reanimation of that event? I am concerned about the Mercury retrograde on some level. On another level, I think it could be very interesting. Because what we're seeing here, I'm just going to give you sort of the boots on the ground here in Texas. The mayor of San Antonio, the mayor of Dallas, the mayor of Houston, mayor of Austin, they're all saying you got to wear a mask wherever you go. That wasn't the case, right? It's like, okay, we're going to open back up, and now you got to wear a mask wherever you go. And Greg Abbott, who's the governor of Texas, isn't really pushing back. The message before was, okay, this is it. This is my executive order, and you got to follow it. Well, that's not really the case, because now the cities have figured out how to get around his executive order. Abbott's not pushing back. We're seeing California basically say, you go out, you got to wear a mask. So this is the transitional event. Now we had the big event, the coronavirus theoretical event, and then we had, of course, what happened, the George Floyd event, which we'll talk about, by the way. And now that we're in the aftermath of Floyd to some extent, so now we're getting ready for the next event. And I think the next event, and I don't think it's any kind of high math or algebraic equation, will have to do with phase 2 of Corona, and then trying to get people back into their homes, right? Because Cancer represents the home. And Mercury retrograde, Mercury is motion, going back home. Now, what are people going to do with this? That's going to be a really interesting question. This is going to be a very interesting part of this dynamic around the eclipse that we're going to have to, sort out in a lot of ways, right? Now, remember, some of these things will not be in the same place. Part of fortune will be determined by geographic location. So will things like the vertex, but some of them will certainly be the same. The angularity will be the same no matter where we go. Chiron involved in the game, right? So we have this kind of, it's not quite an exact T-square, but because we have Chiron and Aries was actually squaring off against some of these planets at that time. Again, Chiron and Aries will be squaring off again. Chiron and Aries squares the sun. It squares the moon. And we are in a really deep chirotic crisis right now. Very deep, very intense. In Aries, having to deal with things like the police, violence. And more than that, it has to do with will, right? It has to do with will. It has to do with the application of will. And Aries represents like action and dynamism and force. And we're seeing some very interesting things happen with Chiron. And that people, for all intents and purposes, in many regards, are either over asserting their will or they're abdicating their will. Like we're looking at extreme versions of Chiron. And we always go to the opposite sign, right? We always go to the opposite sign to understand what's happening with Chiron. So the opposite sign here is Libra. And we see Juno. We see Juno, which represents some version of innocence. The married maiden. The Juno is sort of the virginal bride in some ways. So we see Juno in play trying to balance things out, trying to get to some level of balance through innocence, but it's also really being kind of at the mercy of Chiron here. And this is, I think, not a great strategy, by the way. And when working with Chiron in your chart, this is what often happens with Chiron. Sometimes people will not be able to face Chiron directly in their chart because Chiron is being essentially regulated by either Saturn or Uranus. So you're either doing more the Saturnian side of Chiron or more the Uranian side of Chiron. So if you've been really Saturnian and doing all the right things and checking all the right boxes, at some point you have got to move into the Uranian position, which means you've got to do something different. You've got to change your structure, change your order, right? Most people are unwilling to do that. So what do? They'll retreat to the other side. They'll try to work it out that way. That doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. The same thing goes for if you're being more of a Uranian type, and you've been more of a Uranian type, and maybe you need more structure, order, and form, but you resist against it. You want to be free. You want to do whatever the fuck you want, right? What happens? We go to the other side. Say, I don't want to do that. I'll go check out the other side here, see what that's like. But that won't work either. So we have to resolve a relationship with Chiron. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing this really interesting dynamic because we're seeing the Uranian side of Chiron go nuts. It's going absolutely nuts, right? We're seeing Uranus dominate here through anarchy. And then what's happening over here is people are getting into some form of capitulation. They're trying to work it out, right? They're trying to get back to some kind of social and spiritual innocence. And we can see this with Juno, transiting Juno. So they're going to donate money, or they're going to wash somebody's feet, or they're going to get on their knee, or they're going to shine somebody's shoes, or whatever that is, right? But whenever you go to the opposite sign, it doesn't really resolve. It's a temporary relief, right? It's like it's getting you out of the situation temporarily. That's not how you resolve it. You may learn something over here, but it's not how you resolve it. In order to really understand and go through your chirotic lesson, or the chirotic lesson of the time, it must be embraced. It must be met, right? It's got to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with. So the other side of the Uranian chirotic crisis, which is violence, anarchy, chop, Saturn. But what we're seeing is capitulation. Trying to make deals. Doesn't work. Does not work. We're not seeing the Saturnian effect here. So this is an overabundance of Uranus, actually. That's really what's happening, right? It's like hypo Uranus. Isn't that right? Or hyper. Whatever one is more. But now we're dealing with these Cancerian kinds of energies. They're very powerful. And, we get into the United States chart, which I'm going to bring in here now. Stop this stream. How do I stop this stream? Let me stop this stream. There we go. All right. I'm going to bring in the United States chart because it's really worth looking at here. And I just love StreamYard. I signed up to become I upgraded my membership today. And thank you everybody who's been subscribing, because it allows me to do stuff like this, okay? And just kind of upgrade the work and the presentation all around. So let's take a look at the US chart. I do use the Sibley chart. So here we can see down here in the second house, we can see essentially the Pluto return to the United States. And, this is when the country was theoretically born. The Pluto return means that there's a death and a rebirth, okay? Death and rebirth. That's what's going on here. What's also interesting is the South Node, right? The South Node of the U.S. happens to be in the sign of Aquarius. So this is a kind of an interesting factor, especially when we see Saturn beginning to move into Aquarius and Jupiter beginning to move into the sign of Aquarius. And that node is at 6 Aquarius. So we're going to see Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter first and then Saturn later, hit that South Node this year. Right? Well, actually, Jupiter will hit it in January. And Saturn will hit it later in the year. Not too far off, though. I think it gets about 5 or 6 degrees. So that's going to really stress some of the, that South Node quality / inequality. And again, what we're seeing is, and I've talked about this before, I call it the simulacra of the New Age, where they're going to give us this other version of what we call a very dark New Age, And again, I'm talking about the energy, not any specific group or any specific race, but a dark version, right? And Saturn's going to come in and it's going to dominate the south node. It's going to dominate it. But people will understand at some point that they're going to understand, and the Saturn domination of the south node will make it quite apparent if it isn't already. Jupiter will expand this as well. It will expand this potential to see sort of the vulnerability. You also get more zealous people trying to push the program. So we have the intensity and the levels being raised sort of simultaneously. But definitely something worth looking at. I don't think we get through the Pluto conjunction without having a new version of whatever it is we're doing. It's just the way it is. And how it's going to look, I've got, we've looked at versions of how it might look. We can certainly explore that, but it's not going to look what it looks like today, either ideologically, democratically, geographically. It will not be the same. Okay, will not be the same. So here we go. Let's look at the eclipse energies. Here we see the eclipse on the outer ring. And here we have Venus and Jupiter in the sign of Cancer, right? So actually, I really, really like Venus and Jupiter and Cancer together. I think they're great together, right? I mean, if you think about it, Cancer being nurturing and protecting and caring and feeding and all those Cancerian things, and Jupiter bringing kind of a broader sense of potential, a broader kind of spirit, right? A bigger version of it all. I think it's actually a really nice combination. And the country definitely has flaws, no doubt about it, but it also has things inside of it that typify the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which I think is the potential, right, for caring and sharing. And, and I brought up many situations in the past where if there's a natural disaster in the world, what do Americans do? By and large, man, they throw money at it. It's like, we want to help. I think one of the greatest examples of that was Hurricane Harvey in Houston. I mean, that was a profound example of people helping, right? That spirit. That's, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter what color your skin was. It's like, if you needed help, you were getting out of there. And it was really, I think, a very underrated event as it relates to kind of who we are. And then you look at somebody like J.J. Watt, who raised millions and millions of dollars in order to help people. And what was really cool about J.J. Watt, none of that money went to the Red Cross. See, I think this really typifies a spirit. We're not perfect. We seem to forget these things. And it's going to be interesting with this eclipse energy on the 21st. We're going to get into the 21st and the symbolism of that and everything. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. Is it going to be a reminder of who we are? Because we sure as hell have been told who we aren't. Okay? That's been the message. Will it be a reminder of who we are? And will we be reminded of who we are through circumstances that look shadowy, occluded, and occulted? Can we have this idea of waking up through a phase where the light has been eclipsed? I think these are important questions to ask. Looks like Masaki's coming online here. We also have what's also quite interesting, the part of fortune and the vertex. Right, so we see the vertex right here at that time, the second ascendant, ninth house, higher consciousness. And that's happening. I'm sorry, eighth house. It's happening in the U.S. eighth house as well, right? Eighth house, resources, hidden resources, to some degree, occult and esoteric principles. So this eclipse is definitely going to have an impact on the U.S., right? and mostly upon relationships, things like liberty, equality, fairness, all that stuff. Will we be able to see it? Will we be able to notice it? Or will the light theoretically be too dark as a result of that? This is going to be a very, very interesting eclipse. There's more to share, but I don't want to do it alone. I want to bring on my man, Masaki Miyagawa.
Hey, Robert.
What's happening, my friend?
Yeah, good. We're in it now.
Let me see if I got you here.
We're in it now.
Yeah, man. Let me. I got to do something with the mic here. Hold on.
Okay.
You're. No, I don't want to kick you from the studio. I don't want to mute your mic. I need to go into the mic settings. Give me 1 second, okay?
Okay. That's better.
Okay, this should be better.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you great. Hey, man, so welcome. Great to have you back.
Yeah, glad to be back.
And you're kicking off my first kind of interview here on StreamYard, and I'm really digging this StreamYard app, man. It's so easy. It's just fantastic, and I know other people use it. So you're the first guest in the StreamYard.
All right.
So thanks again and welcome back. So what's happening there on the streets of LA? Can you just give us kind of a boots on the ground view?
Well, I think people are getting used to the new normal, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, when it was super locked down, the streets were pretty empty. Now I'm noticing the freeway traffic is almost back to normal, but on the street, there's not a lot of traffic, but on the freeways or the highways, there's a lot of traffic now. It's kind of dystopian. I mean, a lot of my observations are things that wouldn't surprise people, but to really digest it and let it hit you at an emotional level, it's kind of tough, because obviously this is a worldwide event. It's affecting everybody, but in my mind, driving through some of the immigrant neighborhoods, like I was in Little Saigon in Orange County, Westminster, just driving down the street, and when you see it's all immigrant businesses, right? People that came here. Some people came, that first wave of Vietnamese came after the fall of Saigon. They were South Vietnamese tightly connected to the U.S. government, right?
Yeah.
That were escaping the Viet Cong communists, right? The day of coming to America and working hard and building up a business, I think that's done. That's what hit me, Robert. I'm like, what is going to happen to all these people? I'm just looking restaurant, right? Like a lot of the immigrant businesses, it's done, and even the top level ones, like people that like Chinese food. I know you were talking about China earlier. The dim sum, right? It's kind of like the high morning tea with little snacks. I wanted to have a business meeting this past week. I called because, things are opening up now. I called and the number just rings. This is like one of the top level dim sum places in the San Gabriel Valley, east of, downtown LA. Mm-hmm. So, it's something we all know, but then to really see, like, I'm wondering, how are these people taking it, and, besides that, we have a lot of the protests happening here. They've kind of died down and become more localized. Mm-hmm. Like 50 people on a corner were signs. Mm-hmm. So I think that although, a lot of your audience have spent more time than the mainstream about what these protests might be about and so forth, I think also that we should consider, because a lot of these people are friends and family or neighbors, right? I think there's a deep psychological level of the anger, fear, and dissatisfaction that needs to be let out somehow. And I think that's being channeled into the protests.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to consider, because I know there's some QAnon people, people that are favorable to Trump, among your viewers. But the other side, because we're living in, Trump's a Gemini, so he has that Gemini polarization effect. Now we're in true no Gemini, where half of America is seeing one reality and half is seeing a total other reality. So the protesters, I think in their mind, everything can be solved if we just get rid of Trump, or on the more extreme end, they want year zero, right? It's the millennial cult, or the revolution, where you destroy everything. They may not even have a real plan about what's going to come next, but they're being helped because there's a lot of funding. Fortune 500 is behind it, right?
Yep.
Bring down George Washington statues, bring down Robert E. Lee statue. Whatever people think, it's kind of
they're
disturbing.
bringing down statues that are actually quote unquote African American, who theoretically helped either free the slaves or were involved in, the sort of the liberation, of their own quote unquote people, right? I mean, they don't care at this point.
It's the reset. They don't understand that, but it's like cause year zero, cultural reset. And although they may not realize it, this is exactly the same as the Taliban in Afghanistan.
That's right.
That they blew up these ancient Buddhas, carvings.
The Buddhists, right? They blew up the Buddha.
And actually the people in villages around, it's like a UNESCO World Heritage Site, right? It's blown up. But the people that actually live there, they may have been Muslim, but because they've lived there for generations, they actually respected that site. It was the outsiders of the Taliban that came that said, you know what? This is not, I don't know what they call it. It's not kosher, but it's, it's like, this is, we can't have this. This is idolatry. Blow it up. This is the exact same mentality of the basically book burning. Yeah. That's happening in America today.
So. Yeah, Sharif don't like it, right?
The Sharif don't like it, yeah.
I mean, this is it. It's cancel culture. It's burn it all down. We've been talking about this for a while now. One of the things, I did a show with Jay, I think about a couple of weeks ago now. One of the things I wanted to talk about with him, but we never really got around to talking about, was this concept of childhood's end. And Childhood's End was a book by Arthur C. Clarke. And I've talked about this before. I've had other shows where I've talked about it before we're at this place now. And in those shows, and I think I even have a post on my website that has to do with Childhood's End. And in it, I brought up this idea. Well, the premise of Childhood's End, people don't know it, is that it takes place theoretically in the future, and there are these massive spacecraft that position themselves over cities across the world. But there's no action with these spacecraft for a long time. Like they're there for like 5, 6, 7 years, and people just kind of get used to them being there, right? But there's something happening energetically. They're doing something, but they're not being involved. And then there's there's this being that eventually descends from one of these craft, and his name is Corellin. And the way that Arthur C. Clarke depicts him is that he depicts him as Lucifer. He's like a combination of Baphomet and Lucifer together. He's got these wings and let me see if I can actually find this thing. Give me one. Keep going.
I think a lot of people know Arthur C. Clarke. He was probably a fan of pizza with a little bit of curry on it.
That's right.
He was down there in Sri Lanka doing some not so nice things,
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, what's his name? Stanley Kubrick shared an apartment with him in Paris, which is why there are people that believe that that's what led him to do the eyes wide shut stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to show people the depiction of Corellin, because I think it's kind of important to wrap our heads around how he was portrayed in the book. And recently, in a mini series that was aired. So here we have Corellin. This is
Oh, hey,
this is what Corellin looks like, right?
friendly looking guy there. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the guy that is going to essentially commandeer the children of the world, right? But the way that he's portrayed is very kind, right, up until a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the original book. Quite interesting, looking like a reptilian eye. So, spoiler alert here is that the people of the earth lose their children, meaning that the children disassociate themselves from their parents and their families, right? They walk away from them.
This is one thing that I've seen also, although the people I'm looking at, they're not in their teens, they're probably in their early mid 20s or something like that. But you've talked a lot about how the university system is basically an indoctrination ground. I'm so glad, Robert, I graduated in 2000. So I went to UCLA, but now it's like to pay that much to get just get brainwashed. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've seen, and I gotta preface this, but that you can't have a good game, you can't have a good battle without two sides.
That's right.
So although I think a lot of people would agree that the left, especially the far left, just went off the cliff, the right wing has to play in it also. But you know, I was talking a couple days ago that they have that saying that the right has no heart. There's a saying, right? The right has no heart and the left has no brain, because it's like the two sides of the right tends to value the sacred masculine or the logic, right? The left, they honestly do want to help people. They want to improve. They're progressives, right?
Honestly, they may have at one point.
Right. Well, typically, but because they're more in that kind of, you know, you have the sun and the moon, right? The masculine and the feminine.
We talked about this yesterday. This was the bulk of yesterday's show, actually.
So, you know, being more of that mothering energy or the moon energy, they're not so interested in facts or logic. It's about how you feel.
That's right.
But, you know, that becomes very dangerous, especially when you start burning stuff in the streets because of how you feel, right? Mm-hmm. So what I've seen recently on my social medias, especially people that are in the ethnic studies area, which we've kind of talked about with Daryl Hamamoto, how the ethnic studies is a whole program, which would include, you know, all of these isms, like the feminism, the ethnic studies and so forth. It's all actually comes out of socialist communist thought, right? That's what happened. Like Bill Ayers, all those guys.
It's the Frankfurt School. You know?
They went from overt, like in the streets, overt activism to turning it into academia and then seeding society for decades in all these positions, right? But I saw one girl and she was saying that, you know, Black Lives Matter and so forth, which, you know, some of the basic ideas I don't disagree with, but when you put it in the context of what's happening, you've broken it down multiple times of the Aquarian multi-leveled hybrid war that's going on, right? You can't just take the surface level look at anything these days. But some of her relatives, and I think she might be Mexican, she come from a Latin background, and her aunties and her mom, the older women in her family, don't you think that all lives matter? Oh, you should have seen. No, auntie, no tia, you don't understand. And then basically she's breaking down, you know the thinking. They have these this kind of far left thinking, they don't take people as individuals. They have these artificial categories. So they said, no, you don't understand. There's this structure of patriarchy, there's the structure of this, and then they fit everything into that.
That's
Whereas, so actually, you know, a lot of the immigrants that came here, they weren't commies. They were escaping a lot of that, right? But it's the kids of the immigrants, and it's these younger generations that never went through. They don't really know where this could go. And I'm born and grown in Los Angeles, but I did live in China for a year. I talked to Cubans who were studying in China. I talked to Russians. If you talk to people from the Soviet blocs, it was nothing nice, Robert.
No, I know. We've talked about this before. I mean, people, excuse me, but you can see like what's going on in Poland, in Hungary, and Slovenia. I mean, those areas, right? That they are staunchly anti.
Oh yeah,
the program that's being run across the planet right now, and in fact, Poland just said no to gender studies. Like that is not a course that they're going to teach in their universities. Because they understand what happens, right? They've been there.
Well, and this is the thing too, everything in balance, right? So one thing that we're kind of moving away from going into the Aquarian Age is the Cancerian energies. And America is a Cancer country, right? So I think that America as it was does not quite fit with where we're going with these Aquarian energies coming in, because Cancer is nation, tribe, family, and so forth. But you can't have your defined group without borders or boundaries, right? Well,
Chop sure has figured that out, right?
Oh yeah, now they're getting concrete barriers put in.
They've got concrete barriers. They're very clear. And you can get it. You can get evicted from Chop, right? I mean, you can get kicked out of there. I getting back to this idea of Cancer, not if you probably look at it right, you'll see that at a certain degree there's going to be an inconjunct between Cancer and Aquarius, right? It's going to be in that 150 degree sort of pocket, right? Because the 180 from Cancer is going to be Aquarius. The 150 is Capricorn. The 150 is going to be Aquarius. So when you get into the inconjunct, you get into that quincunx, there's a relationship there that needs to be kind of addressed and figured out. But there's no roadmap for it, right? So I think there's a place for the Cancerian energy to be a part of this Aquarian kind of model. But it's going to have to be migrated and really understood from a different perspective.
Well, I did a talk a couple of days ago, and I was saying that if I had to choose, because I don't consider myself left or right, but I would tend to lean more right, just because if you take into the consideration, which most of the left have no idea of, they're in the mode, but they don't really understand because they haven't thought out where this is going. I mean, we're witnessing the implosion of the system. They're literally calling it the reset now.
Yeah, sure.
So the left is pushing and pushing without realizing, and we've probably already crossed the line. Once you cross that line, there's no going back, right?
Yeah.
The right, it's trying to conserve something. So and they've done a little more research than the left. But like you're saying, I don't think that model of the Trumpers is going to quite work. It's going to have to be reformulated. It's going to have to integrate more things. I think the model could be closer to something that your viewers and listeners are, where they're aware of some of the metaphysical principles. They're readers or practitioners in their own right, and they're using the esoteric and applying it practically, right? I think that's the model that could more fit with the Cancerian energies in the Aquarian Age.
Well, this is a really interesting discussion because I've met a number of these people in person, and when we were all together, it was very clear that every single one of them was a very strong individual. Like there were no wallflowers that, came out here in October. Okay. And at the same time, there was enough space for all of these very strong personalities to kind of contribute and flourish and find their niche, right? And I think kind of that's what you're talking about. And things got done, people helped out. I mean, it was, granted, it was our version of a temporary autonomous zone. I mean, we had a temporary autonomous zone in a hotel in Kerrville, right? That's what we did. That's what we created for 3 days. And as a kind of a mini social experiment, it was a smashing success, an absolute smashing success. And here's where I'll chime in. And I think maybe you might agree with it and add your own piece to it. If you look at a lot of the people that are part of the whole kind of like, CHOP thing or Occupy thing, like some of these people actually have kind of like metaphysical principles, like they're burning sage.
Oh, yes,
right?
Of course.
Right. They've got their drum circles and stuff, right? I mean, so there's part of that that's like, it's kind of familiar to some of the people that might be watching this broadcast, but you may not relate to their politics, but you may recognize some of those rituals, right? What I feel like that they're missing here is that they're missing like a bigger picture. They're missing like a more macro kind of application, and that really by defining their world, their society, their culture, it's cut off other options and it's become very exclusionary, right? That's what it feels like, and it's unfortunate because I think some of that stuff is really applicable to this idea of the Aquarian Age, but they're letting their model, their blueprint, and their paradigm really be defined by these other, what I'd call authorities. And on the other side, we don't want the authorities, which is ironic, right? It's like they don't want the authority, but their system is being defined by authorities.
Robert, the entire, mode of this far left, which is, and the left of today is not the left of 20 years ago. There are elements there, but the left, which has, a lot, because
let's look at George McGovern. Okay, George McGovern was your typical kind of lefty Democrat.
Right.
He was a pacifist. I don't think George McGovern was actively involved in the overthrow of the United States.
Well,
right?
see,
that was not his gig.
The left used to be anti-war. The
left
used to be against corporations. The left used to point out the problems with the military-industrial complex. But now they're not, because that 8 years of Obama just like put them to sleep. And now they're out in the streets burning stuff, especially the younger people.
Right, and they love stuff like Amazon. They love Amazon. They love their kind of corporate pals, because the corporate pals are actually, funding a lot of stuff they're going through.
Well, I think that if you take into consideration the opposite node or the opposite sign of Aquarius, which is Leo, I think that a lot of this is you're seeing that dark manifestation of the ego and narcissism, but you have the advantage of being anonymous also. You could say whatever you want. You could put stuff on fire. You can feed your own ego. You could make people take the knee, but there's no consequences because you're just in the mob. You're in that hive mind, that Aquarian mass, right? Right. So I think you're seeing some of it's because we're barely entering the Aquarian Age. I think a lot of the darker manifestations are still being worked out, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree with that. I don't think it's game over, but we're certainly seeing that. Getting back to childhood's end, and this is kind of where this all launched, is that what happens in childhood's end is that the children leave their parents and they begin to communicate telepathically. They begin to have these supernatural powers. And if you read the book, the children basically take place in an orgiastic destruction of the planet. I mean the planet. I'm not talking about the planet, and then there's like one person left. It's like Corellin said, I'm going to leave one person so that they can be the witness and tell whoever comes what happened, right? So it's a very heavy, very dark ending to that book. But I feel like what we're seeing is this kind of reenactment.
Sure.
When we see these 15-year-olds, some of the Zoomers,
Right.
and some of the older versions of the Zoomers leaving their parents, and we watch them on YouTube. I hate my parents; they're racist.
Okay,
right?
boomer. Okay,
Right?
boomer.
We're seeing that.
Well,
This is the echo effect of childhood's end.
Well, first I want to preface this by saying there are a lot of opportunities. I know a lot of holistic practitioners that are doing very well in this time, even though we're in a total economic collapse. So that tells you right there, this is what a lot of us were saying, right? The trend for like Uranus and Taurus, although it's very disruptive and shaking things up, total chaos. But with the Uranus and Taurus until 2026, that's us, right? The readers, the people that are doing holistic work, the healers. A lot of people I know are even reaching new levels of success with live streaming and so forth. But when you look at, because we were talking about the kind of anger and the violence in the streets, right? I'm seeing, because I don't know that many young people, like say the teenagers, but I'm looking at people like 30s, something like that. I know people that are ex-military that are completely broken, that came from bad family situations. They never did any self-work. And all those issues are coming out in these movements. In fact, I know at least one guy that he's planning to move from the East Coast to go to Washington to be close to the action. This guy's ex-military. Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing is what was prophesized in, Albert Pike's letter to Mazzini. I think it was 1871, the 3 World Wars, which may be a fabricated document, but you can look at the points and have it be food for thought that basically the Third World War would be, involve the nihilists. So these nihilists are people that they just want to see it all burn. Mm-hmm. The pain that they felt inside for a long time, they want to put on everybody else.
Yep.
Right. So this is a thing too. The society has become so broken down that what you're seeing now is just a manifestation of things that have been bubbling for decades.
Mm-hmm. Well, bubbling and or programmed and or helped along. I mean, there are a number of factors that are contributing to what we're experiencing now, for sure.
Well, too, that Gemini rules mind controls and MKs. And I have seen firsthand, going back to Trump's election, that these are people that I talked to, that they were MKs. They were mind controls. So you have that factor also. Probably 90+% of the people, they're just being swept along and sucked into various movements naturally. But there are definitely, Robert, there's people that, they've been programmed to activate at this time.
Well, they have,
so that's a whole other factor, right? Yeah.
I mean, again, I've talked about this when we look at, Pluto and Scorpio, the quote unquote millennials. I mean, they got Pluto and Scorpio, Neptune and Capricorn, Uranus and Capricorn. Those are all outer planets, right? They are dominated by outer planets. Like you've got that in your chart, right? Neptune, Uranus and Pluto. We go to the Zoomers, and they've got Uranus in Aquarius, Neptune in Capricorn, Neptune in Aquarius, Pluto in Sag. So they're dominated by outer planets. These are generations that are moved and driven by collective forces. Like they do not resonate with the same kinds of ideas around individuality that the boomers, or like this little generation after the boomers, like Generation Jones, like the Pluto, Uranus and Virgo people, or Gen X, right? They have more individual ideas, more individual thoughts. They're kind of more individually sort of oriented. The millennials are driven by the collective idea, the collective force, the collective energy.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because Aquarius kind of has, or the Aquarian Age, it kind of has it's kind of like a contradiction. It's very individualist and very rebellious, but at the same time, it's an impersonal sign where they need to check against the group what to confirm what their position is.
That's right.
Which is very much this collectivist thinking of the far left, where they're what I saw, especially that Blackout Tuesday, is like the communist struggle session, right? Why didn't you post the Saturn cube? Why didn't you post the black square? Is your thought ideologically pure?
Right.
And but the thing also is, it's a combination of the natural impulse of the chart and the setup that people were born with, combined with they don't know history. Because even LA has a lot of Armenians, one of the largest Armenian populations in the US, might be the number one. Glendale, California. When we had the lines, like, we gotta wait at Trader Joe's, gotta wait like an hour to get in, right? Some of the Armenian guys that grew up in Soviet Armenia, they go like, yeah, when I was little, I remember this. This is communism. You're like waiting in lines. That's not America.
Yeah,
but
like red lines from the Depression.
But if you have no context, you can't draw the parallels.
Right.
They don't know where this is going. So
yeah, and what's really interesting too, and I don't want to put everybody in a box, but if you talk to somebody who is maybe 21, 22 years old, and you wanted them to get them to watch something prior to, say, 2015 or 2014, they'd think that was old. Right. You show somebody programs, movies, whatever, from the year 2000, and it's like, that's a whole other era, man. Well, think about that.
Well, let me tell you something, Robert. And I was thinking about this a lot. I was in Little Tokyo yesterday. I sent you a video I sent of a very interesting occult sculpture in Little Tokyo. But we're about in the Obon season, or Bon Odori. It's for the Japanese Buddhist temples. We have a festival. It's kind of like a All Souls Day or Dia de los Muertos, where you remember the people that have passed, right? It's not happening this year because of the lockdown restrictions. Got a social distance and everything, right? You can go to a protest, but you can't go to this, and it has to be a specific kind of protest, but you can't do your rituals. You can't do your cultural customs. And check this out, Robert. We were able to do this in the concentration camps in World War II. The U.S. government concentration camps, when 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated for like 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. We could do it, that's like original FEMA camp, right? We could do it in the FEMA camps, but we can't do it now. And in my entire life, Robert, I've gone pretty much every year. It's something in my life that it's always been there, and now it's not there. And again, this is like a year zero.
Year zero, man. And it started when they canceled the Chinese New Year. That was it. Chinese New Year, done. So I wanted to just come back to this chart really quickly, and then we're going to move on to some other stuff. But I've been paying attention to this Neptune opposition in the U.S. chart. So Neptune actually is the highest planet. In the Sibley chart, it's at apex. And in the 9th house, it has to do with things like spirituality, religion. It's actually, Neptune is, I believe, exalted in Sagittarius. So in astrology, we call this accidental exaltation. But there's also Black Moon Lilith hanging out there right by Neptune. So there's also this shadow that comes along with religion, right? The kind of the dark shadow. Mm-hmm. We get into sort of the opposite sign, which has to do with things like manipulation through religion, whether it's mega churches or scandals inside of churches around what happens with kids. That Black Moon Lilith is just hanging out there, right? And Virgo is about innocence. So Black Moon Lilith brings a shadow to this Neptunian sort of innocence, right? Service up there in the 9th house. But here, we have transiting Neptune moving into opposition with the natal Neptune of the U.S. chart. So there's this tension now and the tension is in Pisces, right? it's resolving or revolving around Pisces, and when we get into Pisces, it's very different energy. Like everybody's a victim or everybody has the potential to be crucified. I mean, there's scapegoats and persecutors on every street corner. And recently we've just had this Mars transit conjuncting Pisces opposite Neptune in the US chart. This is a significant transit, right? It has to do with violence and victims and man, it's heavy stuff. Like it's very heavy stuff what's going on here with this opposition.
Well, do you remember, Robert? This was just a few days after that Blackout Tuesday. They had a BLM die-in. It was in Boston, I believe.
Yeah.
Where, the people mock like they're dead.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I was like, wow. Because, most people, they don't know the symbolic implications they don't even know like where we are on the timeline. Like when you're dealing with astrology or reading systems, you start to become aware of cycles, patterns, the seasons. And I don't think we're at the end of everything, but I think we're at the end of the age.
Well, we are starting. It's 2020, right? It's the number 20. It's the Aeon, right? So we're there.
And so some would say we are in the harvest time, like kind of a soul harvest, a spiritual harvest. So you're going to lie down and act like you're dead with thousands of other people. And you're going to post the black cube of Saturn, which is all about sacrifice on your social medias. When I saw that, I went, I don't know about that,
No, it's a really dark invocation. And people don't understand really the power of intention. They don't really understand this. I've been wanting to share this story for a while, and I think it's kind of worth sharing now. I used to live with this gal back in like the 80s, mid 80s. And so I got to know her, I got to know her family, and her brother was kind of a pretty successful chiropractor in Washington, D.C. Actually stayed at his place for a while. Anyway, he did a lot of stuff with his money and his practice that wasn't above board. Like there was a lot of hiding money, and he got busted. He got busted, sort of shifting things around, different accounts, taxes, insurance claims. So he was, a little too slick, right? So he has to go to court and face the judge. His strategy was to go into court and act like he was feeble, even though he wasn't feeble. Okay. He went into that court, he was like doing this kind of a thing. And because he thought that maybe if he had that kind of approach, the court may have mercy on him, right? Well, the court didn't really have mercy on him. He still had to pay all that shit. But this is what happens. Not long after that, he begins to suffer a really debilitating breakdown of his entire neural system in his head.
Well, he put it out
right there. so he speech is starting to get slurred. I mean, all these things are starting to kind of like break him down. So ultimately, guess what? He became that feeble guy that walked through that door for the judgment. Right. Because that's what it was, the judgment. And where are we now? We're in 2020, right? This is the Aeon. This is the time of the judgment. Right. And if you're laying down,
if you're playing that role,
you're on your knee and you're laying down.
Yeah.
Do the math on that.
Well, this is the other thing too, is that, these things that are happening, like if there's a riot in your neighborhood or you have a business and looters are coming, I guess you got to do what you got to do, But in my opinion, because I think a lot of us were looking at this even before Trump came in, and I was looking at that 2024 date before the Trump election.
Oh, right? there was, absolutely. We had the eclipse coming in 2024. Yeah.
So in my mind, although I think we've enjoyed watching Trump as president, he's a character, right? But in my mind, it doesn't really matter this fall who is elected. It could be a little better. It could be a little worse. You could push it here, a little bit there. But in my mind, the USA as 50 states is done.
Yeah, I mean, we were
So
talking about that before you get on here. There's going to be a
so
new version of whatever this is.
so I mean, are you gonna get shot or shoot people over a statue of Christopher Columbus like those guys in Arizona? This is madness, you know. So I think you have to stick to your principles, but you at some level, like I think this is a thing. This in at some level, this is a script, and it's a game. And just like on Blackout Tuesday, they posted the black Masonic square, like the Masonic tile, the white and black tiles,
Yeah.
or it's the cube of Saturn.
Yeah.
It's a game, but I think some of us, we already know enough that I don't want to play that game. I'm not invested in this game, because if you're more invested in, like, you know what, I'm helping people in my practice, I'm doing readings, I'm doing the healing work, we're aware of these things that are going on politically, but you're not sucked in emotionally. You're also not going to get sucked into those traps, and the extreme pain is going to be put on people soon. You know, that's the thing too, is the US or a lot of people in the West, they are actually so quote unquote privileged that they have taken stability for granted. They have no idea of what is about to hit. And I don't think they would be in such a fervor of doing what they're doing if they understood what these actions are going to result in 6 months or less.
Well, that's because I think the majority of them are possessed.
Oh yeah, De Blasio's daughter. You put up that photo with her eyes are like, her pupils are like saucers.
Dude,
yeah,
scary, scary shit. I'm going to bring up some interesting graphics here that I've been wanting to share with people, and I think they're quite powerful, actually. And it gives you an idea as to kind of this sort of Gemini dualistic dialectic that we're involved with. And the first quote is from supposed George Soros, right? This is a George Soros quote, and I want people to read this thing. I'm going to bring down the United States by funding black hate groups. We'll put them in a mental trap and make them blame white people. The black community is the easiest to manipulate. That it comes from BILD Build. It's an interview with a German magazine.
Hey, at least he's honest, huh?
He's always been that. He's never made any bones about, if it's still even him, right? That was in 2014. That was 6 years ago, if he's still around. So there you go. I mean, here's your strategy right there. And I'll show you another quote that I think is very pertinent. That's on the other side of the ledger sheet. We're seeing both of these quotes really take shape and have resonance here.
Okay.
And this is Solzhenitsyn.
Right.
Attacks on the police is an old communist tactic to eliminate law enforcement. The Bolsheviks successfully unleashed widespread attacks on police in the run-up to the October Revolution.
Right. Well, that's another thing. Although this is something I've only heard about, right? That like we didn't live through it since it was like the early 1900s. But the situation in Tsarist Russia and in, I guess it was Weimar and Nazi Germany, it got really crazy when they got rid of the police. And what's happening now? They're getting rid of the police.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was it, man. Once they got rid of the police, and then the armed forces, the Navy, lined up behind the Bolsheviks. They're going to support, and of course the Bolsheviks said, "Oh yeah, it'll be a shared and cooperative government." And it didn't take the Bolsheviks long, less than a year, and Lenin was killing all those people. Right, that's what was happening, and people don't understand this. They don't understand how that game works. So, I wanted to bring up Trump's chart here with the eclipse real fast.
Oh yeah.
But before I do that, this is like completely off topic. Have you been tracking Jared Leto lately? Do you know what he's up to now?
I don't know. People probably know is his band 30 Seconds to Mars, and they kind of have a cult behind him, right? He dresses up like Jesus, and they have a private island they walk around.
That's right. That's right. He's
Yeah.
got his own island, and he's claiming himself to be a messiah.
And he also bought that Lookout Mountain facility, which is the famous secret military film production facility up in the Hollywood Hills, which is talked about a lot in the Weird Scenes in the Canyon by David McGowan.
David McGowan stuff. It might even have some connections with the Getty, right?
So Jared Leto, he bought that. You know, who knows what's under? It's like a Batman's lair. Who knows what's under there? You know,
yeah, just more high strange for our times. Yeah. All right, so I want to put Trump's chart up here.
Yeah, Robert, you think he's gonna make it? I hear it's looking pretty bad for Trump going into the end of the year.
Well, here's what I think. Right, he's got the true node on his side. Right. Mm-hmm. This is the transiting true node, and it's coming in right on his sun. He's got that natal node at 20 Gemini. That's gonna peak on the election. And when I saw that, I'm like, he's gonna win. Like, he is at his peak right here, and I still think he's gonna win. I mean, even though if we have an election, by the way. Mm-hmm. I still think he's going to win. Now, whether or not he'll bring the country together, the election is bloody. But I would say, based on the chart, he's going to win, right? That he's probably going to carry the day. And let me just say this: under normal circumstances, that's a guaranteed W.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not living in normal circumstances. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, again, to me, it doesn't really matter because let's say Trump wins. The protests continue because True Node Gemini goes, all through 2021. So it's going to be more chaos in the streets. Trump, I think one of the maximum chaos scenarios is Trump wins and then he dies or gets taken out somehow. The right wing has not even fired a shot yet. If that happens, America, watch out, because a lot of these patriots, they were saying a couple of years ago, you let us have this election. If you don't let us have Trump, we're going to come out, and that really hasn't happened yet. It's starting to happen, but not really, not to the extent of like Black Lives Matter's been out in the streets. What does Trump call them? The silent majority or something like that. There's a lot of people that haven't really taken a move yet. But all this pressure and the pushing of this revolutionary fervor, it's gonna explode at some point, I think.
The thing that's always concerned me about Trump's chart is his midheaven, which is conjunct Algol and decapitation. And I don't know if you've been following CHOP, not the show on the Food Channel. But they're talking about guillotines. And if you go back and look at the history of the Obama administration, didn't they buy like 50,000 guillotines or some shit like that?
It was for those 50,000 hot dogs that they got from Chicago.
Right.
Right.
So I think that Trump, and I've looked at his chart, and he's got very strong ties to the French Revolution. And I've done those charts before. I don't want to do them now, but this is the one aspect of his chart that troubles me. And let's just say we get through everything with Mars here being in Aries for the next 6 months. At the beginning of the year, it transits into Taurus. So we're gonna have that Mars Taurus conjunction, and again, more radical, martial, unpredictable. The money game comes into play here, but then that Mars is going to conjunct his midheaven. Okay, now timing is everything. Now, 2 years ago, right? Mars cycles are 2 years. The synodic cycle of Mars is roughly 2 years, right? So 2 years ago, he already had that. But we're in a different place in the universe right now. We're in a different place socially. So when transiting Mars gets on his midheaven and conjuncts Algol, look out. That's in the first of the year. That's like
Well,
late January.
you know what I was just thinking about as you're talking about this is, although a lot, and Trump is easy to hate. I mean, the guy's abrasive. He's a bully. He's a liar. You can look at his chart. He doesn't like he's in that the power positive thinking. It's just
we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Right there, Mercury Neptune square, Mercury Jupiter square, right?
The truth, you can ban Dan. He's a Gemini, so he could justify whatever, But it's funny that a lot of the left are saying Trump's a fascist, he's a Nazi, and all this stuff. When Trump he comes out of more like mafia circles, that's much lower level. Where what's coming in is the corporate Aquarian takeover, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they already control everything, but now it's becoming, like you've been talking about, the corporate is going to start to shift and take over the role of the governmental, model. So it's just funny that they can't see it, because the thing is, like, this Chop Chaz and Antifa, and even to extent the Black Lives Matter, right, is I would say, the Black Lives Matter is more 99% well-meaning people that are more from the average, I would say, population. But the Antifa, which is like the special forces of the left, right, when the protesters are saying, like, we're not here to loot or cause any problems, which is true. It's those black bloc. We don't even know who they are. It's like, no, dummy. Don't you get it? You're the two-armed. The organizers, they're connected to both. You guys are just the cover for the Antifas, right? But the Antifas, these people at this autonomous zone in Seattle, there's no way they can really do much without the corporate backing, because they're so individually weak. They're not really ready for a real quote-unquote war, but they're just being used as the wrecking ball to push the agenda through.
Oh, of course.
And then once it's all done, they're gonna get rid of these. I mean, they can't survive a few days without their, like, vegan meats and whatever. They're like, send soy milk because we're running out.
So here's my thoughts around that. I feel like CHOP is like an experiment. Like, I think they're running a program there, and there are people inside of CHOP who are like behavioralists. Like, there are people that are observing, they're watching, they're taking notes, they're essentially figuring out what happens in a very small dedicated area when a group like this comes in and does what it does, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a lab, an open air lab, and kind of a really bizarre social experiment. I mean, I feel like that's going on, and they're learning, they're getting data inputs from this thing all the time.
And I think you might have talked about it, that one of the main people behind it is this Indian American woman, that she's a career activist. She's a former tech person, and her ex-husband was high up in Microsoft.
That's right. Yeah.
So there you go, right there. That's who's behind it.
You also, and we talked about this, I think, 2 days ago, that Raz Simone has really strong ties with the government of Dubai. Like, this is a guy that has 3 cars. He's got a Tesla. He's got a Jag. He's got a smoke shop. He's got a lounge. He's got all these properties. Like, where does he get all this money from? He's a convict.
Oh, wow, Robert. Revolutions take money, and sometimes it takes 3 cars.
But where is he getting the money from? Right. I mean, I think that's really the question.
Well, that's the thing too, is that,
I have an idea. I think he's getting his money basically from Saudi Arabia through the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, right. And see, this is the thing, is that I think at this point it doesn't really matter. Like, we can talk about it, but where this is going, we're going to say, like, remember how that was? Remember when we were going through that? Right. But since we're on a forum of enlightened minds that are into these topics, just like, in one level, yes, it's an open conspiracy, but at another level, this is karma for the U.S. because although individually, we weren't overseas overthrowing countries, but a lot of people here, especially if you never paid attention, you never said anything against it openly. A lot of us were, like, at least on social media, we're posting about like the Ukraine Maidan, Brazil being overthrown, Arab Spring, Libya, and all those things. But just living in the U.S. and at some level we are benefiting from the American imperialism. What do you think happens when, over 100 years, how many countries has the U.S. flipped?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this the other day, right? I mean, yeah. So, but you and I didn't do it,
right? But
and I don't know about you, but I've actively spoken about this,
right? Well, that's what I said. Like we have
years, okay.
But it's the thing. One of the key things, though, is that they actually not just the same techniques, but the same people. The same people that were doing the Ukraine Maidan.
It's a color revolution, man. Of course,
they're doing this. So the thing is that the people that are involved in these movements, because they don't know anything about geopolitics, they actually don't really know anything about revolutions, right? They don't know what a color revolution is, so they can't even see. They have no read of the playing board. Right. So that's why we're at this point.
Yeah. Well, look, this stuff factors into it. Don't get me wrong. I'm with you. We talked about it. We've gone in, we've carpet bombed Afghanistan. We've, we flipped Libya and turned it into basically human trafficking hotspot. I mean, there's been a lot of damage as a country that we've really been doing since the 90s in a significant way.
Yeah.
But and I'll say this, and I'll, you could take the baton and run with it. Yeah. There was a really great comment on the show from the other day ago. And it was about a line from Sympathy for the Devil, right? When Mick Jagger says, well, who killed the Kennedys? Well, after all, it was you and me. Right. And it's like, no. Right. I pushed back on that.
That was Daddy Bush. Well, it was Daddy Bush did that.
but what Mick Jagger is saying is like, guess what? Right? You're responsible for this. Like you did it. No, Mick, I'm sorry, we didn't do it. Right? And I wasn't the guy pushing those buttons, and I wasn't the guy, sticking a bayonet into somebody. We know who they were. Right. We know who they were. We know who those people generally are, but they're the ones that aren't getting the brunt of the so-called karma now, are they? No, they're actually taking the karma and theoretically redirecting it right onto us, right?
That's why they make you put close to black square, because you take the karma, not them, right? But I was going to say about the funding. Now, I lived in China. China is a government, just like U.S. is a government or Israel is a government. So the people in the government is kind of like two different things. But you're talking about funding, right? I'm sure China's dumping tons of cash, and they don't even have to show their face.
Counterfeit cash.
And just like we've been funding the Uyghurs in the Western China, it's Chinese Turkestan.
We've been behind the Hong Kong protests.
In the Hong Kong, you don't think China's dropping a tremendous amount of cash on these Antifas?
Of course,
I'll tell you, I think I might have mentioned this guy before, but I got a buddy that's in FBI Asian Crime Division, and he's from California, but he's Chinese American, so he speaks Mandarin. He was undercover doing, whatever, buying contraband. Like, I'm a college student, I want to buy some guns, I'll flip them. Dealing with the Chinese. He told me there's Red Army all over the 626. Like, you go to San Gabriel Valley, all the way. You can drive a good 30 minutes straight, Robert. It's just all Chinese, Vietnamese businesses. He says there's Red Army, there's Chinese intelligence all through there. But because it's a weird thing, it's like, I don't know if the U.S. government has a hands-off policy or what, because they're pretty much doing whatever they want, and hardly any of them get busted.
Well, they've been sleeping with the enemy for a long time. Right. They've been sleeping with the enemy. The Clintons, it all starts with Nixon, when Nixon goes to China and kind of, does the handshake deal and everything.
Mhm.
But then it gets much more intertwined, ingrained. You get most favored nation status through the
Mhm.
Clintons. So we've been sleeping with the enemy for a long time. And that gets into even the relationship with so-called Soviet Union and Russia. The Cold
Mhm.
War was just, kind of a scam, right? It was a
Yep.
scam.
Yep.
And you look at the way there are people inside of the government. They were always doing deals, doing business, exchanging secrets with Russia, right? So we've always been in bed with the enemy. We've always been sleeping with the enemy. I don't
Mhm.
think that that's like a
Well,
revelation,
the
but the
the
numbers, though,
right.
that's a whole other thing.
The difference though is this in the Soviet bloc, the people knew that communism was BS, and people
Yeah.
here, the young people, seem to want it. I'm like, you sure you know that? Because that's the thing. It goes back to what I was saying. It's like, it might be part of these Neptune Pisces energies that we're in. Also, it's like a fantasy, or it's a cosplay that they call LARPing, the live action
Yeah.
role play,
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
the people actually, the American, you could say a lot about the U.S., but one of the reasons traditionally why people have come here is it's one of the most stable places, easiest to do business, and even something as simple as renting an apartment or something. You try going, I don't know if you've ever done this, Robert, but other countries like Europe, Latin America, it is very difficult to rent a place to stay compared to here.
Yes. Yes. I
You
know
know,
you've got to have 2 letters of
yeah.
recommendation, and no, there's a lot of hoops you got to come through.
In LA, you could come as like whatever, undocumented, like whatever they call illegal. You have
Mhm.
first and last month's rent, you're in. You got a place. You can't do that in Europe or even like Mexico. You can't do that. You need like they call fiador, to vouch for you to cover the value of the apartment, blah 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 blah. But they come here because it culturally might have some, because if you gave a lot of these immigrants the choice, if they could live back home in a stable environment, they would probably want to not be here. They would probably just
Yeah,
go
I'd
back
agree.
to
I
where
would
they're
agree. I mean,
from.
we've talked about that. It's like,
Yeah,
why would they want to leave their families in
and their
Mexico,
culture,
right?
and their
In their
culture.
culture, right?
But check this out, right? My first real job was doing documentary film,
Mhm.
and the experience of Japanese Americans in the U.S. 120,000 Japanese men, women, and children, whole families, put in concentration camps after Pearl Harbor, right? So from like 42 to like 45, 46, they were in these holding facilities in the boonies, right? So the question was, post 9/11, could this happen again in the US? Could Muslims or Islamic community be put in concentration camps? Which is a legitimate question. So we did a documentary. And there was one guy, he was an African Muslim guy. And he said, we're not trying to do anything bad. We're like anybody else. Why do we come to America? He said, because most people, they just want to work 9 to 5, right? Close out. You go home, have dinner, spend time with the family, and then go to sleep and not worry about somebody kicking your door in at 2 a.m. because you said the wrong thing. What's happening to America? That's gone. Now you're worried about, well, like, am I being tracked? Did I say something online and all this? And the people who are on the right and left grew up in a situation where we take the stability for granted, but especially the left, they think they can push this and cross certain lines and still retain the ability to buy anything you want at the store, to have your soy milk, have that kind of stability. It just,
No,
you can
look,
understand it, but my eyes go like this when it's getting
yeah.
to this like revolutionary fervor.
I mean, let's just cut to the chase, right? If they're
Yeah.
successful and they're going to flip the script, and this country goes through a very intense and hot war revolution, and somehow this heavy duty Buddhist socialism emerges as
Mhm.
the new organizing principle in government, the people who have been participating and banging the drum the hardest and loudest
Oh, they're gonna be
when
gone.
when the new masters come in, they're gone.
They're gone. Yeah.
They're just gone because the new game plan will have nothing to do with what
Well,
they thought it was going to be. And I'll tell you the other thing too. This is the
uh-huh.
other thing, right? Is that, and we may be talking about this from the quote unquote Antifa side or the
Uh-huh.
communist side or the socialist side, but we also have to look at, what's going on in the inner cities,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And we have a portion of the black community now who has been really radicalized. And I'm not even talking about from an ideological perspective, although that may be part of it, but radicalized in the sense that they are determined now that they are going to get what they believe is theirs and has been denied to them for a very long period of time, right? This is a fact. This is an absolute fact. And that new regime won't put up with that either, right? They will not put up with that at all, because that new regime will demand excessive order more than anything. And that both of these groups, I'm going to put them both together now, they're being allowed to act out. They're being activated, right?
Of course.
But when the new sheriff comes to town, that's what's going to happen. And they don't realize that.
Well, my family came out of the so-called movement circles in the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
So, America does have a deep history of segregation and racism, and my family grew up under that in LA. So when it came to the 60s and 70s period, you had the Black Panthers, and you had a lot of kind of cultural revival and different kinds of things happening at that time. So a lot of the ethnics who had kind of suppressed their ethnic side and try to be super American, especially Japanese, psychologically, you're put in concentration camp for 4 or 5 years for having this face and speaking a different language. A lot of them just try to be super American, right? So when the 60s came, there was a legitimate reason for getting into this kind of, it was a left movement, but it wasn't the left.
It should have been over and done with after the 60s, right? I mean, it's
that's why I bring this up, Robert, because the mode of conversation of the left is a good 50, 60, 70 years behind. Because just like you're saying, they're thinking they're going to get some kind of socialism, communism, some kind of new ethnic hierarchy. You're not going to get that. What you're going to get is AI. What you're going to get is social credit score. So this is the thing too, is you ask your average BLM protester, what's your view on the incoming food shortages and hyperinflation? They're like, what? I'm interested to know what your viewpoint on social credit score and artificial intelligence. It's not even on their board,
No. Yeah.
But they'll find out in a few years.
So let's round things up here. There's a lot of chatter and heat about the 21st, right? I think we got Trump. We got a rally with Trump in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Could get very weird, very, very weird. There's a lot of strange kinds of events that show up around the 21st. Let me just throw this up here. And again, this is going to be the eclipse energy, right? The 21st is the eclipse energy. So let's look at some of these events from the 21st in prior history.
I'm sure as we move into Cancer season, it's going to get even more, inflamed, the situation.
So these are some of the things that I found here that were kind of interesting. Let me see if I can zone in on it. So Louis the 16th in 1791, right? He's on his way. He's on his way to Bahrain during the French Revolution. So on June 21st, it is an exodus. He's leaving. He's leaving. He's leaving Versailles, right? He's going to Bahrain because that's where he was. He was in Versailles. So that's kind of interesting. And again, we've got these connections. We're seeing connections with Trump and Louis the 16th, at least with that midheaven, that really connects him up to the capital. There was some other stuff I don't want to get into, but there were some other connections there with the charts. So let's see what else we have. We got the Irish Rebellion. 1798, Greek War of Independence. That's happening. We've got the American Civil War, the Battle of Jerusalem Plank. The United States captures Guam. This is really interesting. Okay, check this out, Masaki.
Mhm.
June 21st is the day of the Boxer Rebellion, where China formally declares war on the United States, Britain, Germany, and France, and Japan. That is 2 days from now. And where is China right now? They are right on the Indian border.
And one of the major things that's happened in the last couple of years is Modi, who I think is a prime minister of India.
Yep.
He's thrown, because they used to have the BRICS, right? It was like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Well, that got blown apart, and now India has thrown in with the Anglo-Zionist bloc. So they're talking a lot with Israel and Trump. And, I think Bannon has had a lot to do with that also, right? So this is serious, but it's a script also. I think we're in like the World War III script or something, So
this is quite interesting too. 5 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court hands down its decision in Gwynn versus the United States, striking down Oklahoma grandfather clause legislation, which had the effect of denying the right to vote to blacks, which is kind of interesting because where's Trump going to be on the 21st? He's going to be in Oklahoma, right? This whole weekend is the rally there.
I don't know if this is connected, but I hadn't thought of it before. I do some business with India, and they have been super, super, super locked down with this whole virus thing. But what's interesting is they started to open up, and then right around the time this China-India thing started kicking up in the last week, they locked down again. But Robert, it's to the point where they cannot drive cars on the road. So I'm like,
well, come on, that's a script. That's a page from the future, right?
Yeah, they can't, and like you can't even. I'm not even talking about like U.S. Postal. Like they will not take DHL or FedEx. So it's like India is completely locked down. I don't know if that's connected to what's happening right now, but it's kind of odd to me, So.
Did you know about this at a Japanese submarine surface in the Columbia River? Did you know about that?
No, I knew about I think there was something off of like Santa Barbara, but I didn't know about the Columbia River.
It said firing 17 shells at Fort Stevens and only a handful of attacks by Japan against the United States mainland. That's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. This is kind of a big deal here. They're getting into some interesting dates now. 3 civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, Michael Schwimmer, murdered in Neshoba County, Mississippi by members of the KKK, which we knew were Democrats. But again, June 21st, right? Fairly significant in a lot of ways. And then what else do we have here? And handing down in the decision, Miller versus California. Go ahead.
So Cancer Deacon 1, it starts June 21st. So that's like the first degree of Cancer, right?
Yeah, it's one flag at sea is lowered and another one is raised. And by the way, this gets right into this Supreme Court ruling, which is by Lyndon Johnson, right? Texas versus Johnson, that American flag burning was a form of political protest protected by the First Amendment, right? So there we go, right there at 0 Cancer, right there. And that's part of this day. So this very interesting, highly charged energy around June 21st.
Nationalism, border issues.
And so there, and then the this whole idea or the historical fact that China declared war in the West in 1900, Boxer Rebellion. So what are your thoughts? You see any smoke around the 21st before we head out of here?
I feel, as far as like the China thing, I feel like it's going to take some more time for this to really catch. I mean, it's already on fire, but I think as far as like a big blow up, it's not going to be the 21st. But I think in general that people, I mean, your listeners are already aware, but one of the things that I've really thought about now is because, I most people know me from working with the pyramids, right? And I was mainly focusing on the EMF aspect, or, just better sleep, keep the cell phone signals, the Wi-Fi off of you. But it's something that I knew, but I didn't really focus on so much before, is that when you keep your energy level high, which is connected to your consciousness, right? The not being so hammered by the electronic frequencies. I think that, there is this concept, Robert, that I'm sure that there's this idea that the more that you ramp your energy up, you actually start to become, quote unquote, invisible to these darker, heavier energies.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to become very important as we go into the end of the year, that people should really, just that simple concept of balance, right? The yin yang, right? Just balanced, and don't get so sucked into, because we are in revolutionary times. Mm-hmm. So I think that, just stay balanced and be that island of stability for yourself and your own sanity and your friends and family and loved ones around you. And I think that whatever practice you do, yoga, meditation, using energy tools, I think that's a really important thing that you can do. Yeah.
Cool. Good. Yeah. Well, I feel like we're going to be moved into another level of shock and awe, right? There's a new level of trauma that people are going to be witnessing here pretty soon, and it may even be on or around the 21st. So I'm gonna do a little add on to that, and I think everything you said is spot on and really important. It's really, really important. You want to keep your vibration really high. You want to stay high up in the food chain. I think it's really important. And if an event does occur that looks stunning or traumatic, it's very, very important to watch how you respond to that event. Okay. One of the things that we've learned over what happened with George Floyd is that there are a hell of a lot of questions with that event. All right. And any of these events that happen, they want to suck us in immediately and get us to commit our emotion to that signal. So I think if we can just, whatever happens, step back and just pause and not be knocked off our feet or blown away. And if we do see something traumatic or it is shocking, right? Just we have to be able to have this thing go right through us like a shock wave.
Well, they want you to react. They want you to react. And, although I think a lot of these things are some kind of false flag or something like that, let's just assume, okay, it was real. And, even better, right? We killed a couple people. Now the whole country is going to go upside down. You got to look at it. You got to look at it that way. It's like the Civil War is a program. The race war is a program.
Yep. It absolutely is.
When I walk outside, it's even more apparent that we're in a matrix, because now it's really like a movie where it's dystopian. There's people with masks, but yet it's almost like an artificial playing board. Like some of the streets are completely empty. Some of the commercial districts completely empty. It's like, this really is like a matrix program. So you know what though? You have say over what you're doing. You can't control what other people are doing, but over yourself, you can try to be as balanced as you can. And like I said, Robert, although this is heavy talk, I can tell you for sure, there's a lot of holistic practitioners I know, readers I know, that are doing extremely well right now. So you can, keep going and maybe even reach new levels of career in this crazy time. It's just that don't expect everything to be stable back here while you're doing your thing. It's probably going to be crazy over here, but we're still doing our work,
Yeah. I mean, I got into this whole concept of kind of readjusting one's timeline by making different choices and, positive choices and meaningful choices. And choices that support, your raison d'etre or your dharma, your purpose. And the more that you continue to make choices along that kind of line, right, that things begin to branch off and reality begins to shift in a very different kind of way. And for me, when I came into 2020, I was really gearing up for 2020. I was, getting in shape. I'm like, okay, here, I want to really tackle my practice. I want to be more kind of on it, more business-like. I want to, build things up, and people like Steve have been really, really helpful in that regard. And of course, people have been subscribing to the streams. The reading stuff has been off the chart. I can't keep up with the readings in some ways. I'm doing all my, but I'm also, I think, doing my best work right now too. So the answer to that question, or what you're bringing up, is absolutely true. Like I had an idea in my head that it was going to look a certain way, and it looks very different, but it's still happening, right? It's still happening, only it's being kind of manifested and reshaped in a different kind of way. So you're absolutely right. When we do our dharma, and when we can, basically make the right choices, make the right decisions, support our work, then the reality of our experience will begin to align. And even the most mundane things can become miraculous in your life. And you'll know you're on when these things happen.
Well, I think I've been to Brazil many times, and I'm like, oh, this is what we're in is Brazil. But the positive side of the chaos, Robert, is like Latin people, Brazilian people, the experiences, and when you can have like a good meal, spend quality time with friends, everything is a lot sweeter. Because it's a funny thing, but when you're kind of complacent and you think, I could buy anything I want, you could do that tomorrow, you actually don't enjoy it as much. It's actually in these pressure points, which Brazil is chaos is a mode of operation. Brazilians, it's like they love life because they know anything could happen, but at the same time, it's like they really they enjoy the sweetness of the quality times and good things like that. So
yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, Masaki. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And thanks to the chat. This is the black belt level of the esoteric here, and you have a lot of practitioners in their own right in the chat. So
we got a chat room of senseis is what we've got.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. Tell people where they can find you, your work and your products and all that good stuff.
Yeah. My site is akaida.com. It's akaida.com. You know that I don't have a lot of basic pyramids anymore, the non-powered, but I am going to release a short run soon, so you can check in with me. I just got restocked on the energy pendants, the tensor ring pendants. I think Steve and Chris are fans, and I think and Emily, she has it too. So, yeah, I have EMF tools, and I would say this right now, although it's still crazy, it's going to get more intense towards the end of the year. So my advice to my clients is start stocking up on things that you think you're going to need now, because if you wait till later, I think it's going to be more difficult. And especially the specialty items like energy tools or like Rife machine, that's a great thing to have. So any kind of like those kind of metaphysical tools, get them now, and you'd be prepared for the future.
We got a fellow Los Angelino asking if you have a gallery. Do you have a physical space that people can visit you or meet you at? Yeah.
I wish. I just have, a lot of my stuff is made to order too. So you could look at my Instagram. It's Masaki_1. So MASAKI_ONE on my Instagram. You could see like all the pyramids and custom pyramids I've done. And then I have Patreon also. It's Pyramid Power on Patreon. And because a lot of the stuff we talk about is too hot for YouTube, a lot of my, some of more the deeper stuff is only on my Patreon. But yeah, I just, doing my thing, and glad to be on the show, Robert.
Thanks again, Masaki. And thanks everybody who is here live in Chatlandia, who is watching after the fact. If you subscribe to the show and support the show, thank you. If not, there'll be a link on the show page, and you'll be able to go to that. You'll also see a link to Masaki's website. And we'll be back Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting look into the weekend in 48 hours. The world can change very rapidly in 48 hours, as we've seen. So you want to be a part of that. Be here on the 11th house on Sunday nights, 7:45 p.m. Until then, use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay open to what's possible. Take good care. We'll see you guys on Sunday night.
All right.